Hello, Pete.
Hey, good morning.
Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
You guys are headed to the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. I can't remember when it wasn't in Indianapolis. Has it always been there?
I really hope it stays there because there's been talk of trying to, of course, in NFL fashion, make more money off of the Combine.
Have people bid for it?
Yes, and it, like I've heard LA and things of that nature, it just could not be a better setup than what Indianapolis provides. I mean, it's very much a convention city, and it's perfect for this type of event.
There was some kind of internal debate too, like when they started to float that out there, where the NFL and its players and coaches and such just rejected the idea. So for now, yes, it is staying in Indianapolis.
But the Chiefs and San Joe, we always hear about these 1-year renewals. So you're like, but what's happening in 2 years?
Yeah.
I'd love it as a Final Four town. I've covered a lot of Final Fours in Indianapolis. You're right. It's set up for conventions and big events with the Lucas Oil Stadium sort of in the middle of things and the hotels all around it. You don't need a car when you're covering something downtown.
Outside for a lot of these hotels. I mean, there's like 8 or 9 hotels that you don't have to walk outside to get to the stadium or to any of the other hotels. I mean, it's the convention center, which is where we'll be for the Combine, where the prospects will roll in, where the GMs and head coaches will talk. I mean, like I said, it's a great setup for this.
The no outdoors is key because sometimes it's bitter cold at the
stadium too, yeah.
In Indianapolis. So not having to go outside is a blessing.
All right. So what happens at the Combine? It's really several hundred prospects will be there to get measured and weighed and timed. And what else happens at the Combine?
Yeah, I think the most important things that the teams take away from, because we've seen teams not go anymore. Like there's some teams that don't go to this anymore. I think it's maybe the Rams, 49ers don't send everyone anymore. The medicals are far and away most important to the teams is what's this injury history? Is he okay? That sort of thing. And obviously, the Chiefs would have found that immensely important with last year's draft, with Josh Simmons being their first round pick. And the second thing is they're figuring out their free agency plans and the prices for players for both their own free agents and maybe for some other teams' free agents. It's all about gathering intel for what the next month is going to bring, which is a couple weeks later will be the opening of free agency.
Yeah, and I think like the NFL will never admit this because the quote unquote legal tampering period opens like weeks later or week 2 later. This is where a lot of deals are just initially talked about between, what would be GMs and agents. And I think that's when those initial conversations happen. Like there's a reason when legal tampering opens, there's several announcements because a lot of this has been talked about starting at the Combine.
What's at the forefront of Chiefs conversations going into the Combine?
To me, it's all about Trent McDuffie. Like you have to figure out at this Combine, what is the price for Trent McDuffie? And to me, that's actually twofold. What is the price to sign him to a long-term contract? What would that look like? What would that look like for a team that is already $50 million over the cap for this year? Probably could save you some money in the immediacy, but you already have other long-term deals on your books with Trey Smith, with George Karlaftis, with your quarterback. Like you've already got other guys signed long-term, so you got to see how that piece would fit into the puzzle. Creed Humphrey's another one. But the other price you need to explore is what would he net in a trade? Because this is what you did 3 years ago with Tyreek Hill. It's one of the reasons Trent McDuffie's here is because you traded Tyreek Hill 3 years ago and recouped a massive haul of draft picks. Trent McDuffie would not net what Tyreek Hill did, but what would he bring back? And you need to figure that out at this Combine because this entire Chiefs offseason pivots on what you do with Trent McDuffie.
Yeah, and I think to Sam's point, they're in a position where they almost have to move him because of needing more selections, needing to have some cheaper answers across the board where maybe you are able to get picks back and you shed that salary in what would be a trade. And you just wonder, he's going into the last year of his contract. Doesn't seem like a guy that would necessarily sit out, but neither did Trey Smith. And for the voluntary portion, at least, we didn't see him out there. So I think it is figuring out just every aspect of the McDuffie question.
And history tells us the Chiefs move on from top cornerbacks.
Yeah, part of this is take advantage of what you're really good at. They're really good at developing cornerbacks without them requiring premium picks. Jalen Watson, who's also a free agent this offseason, is a 7th-round pick. Noah Williams showed, I thought, a lot of potential when he got some run late in the season, in particular, more on the outside cornerback than when they had tried him in the slot. And third-round pick. L'Jarius Sneed was a mid-round pick. Charvarius Ward was an undrafted free agent who they brought in a post-camp trade. And they developed all those guys and to players. I mean, Dave Merritt and Steve Spagnuolo, that combination I think is great at developing that position. So if you're really good at something, take advantage of the fact that you're really good at it. And if this was left tackle, if this was wide receiver, I think what Pete said, he'd probably feel differently about that. And I certainly would feel differently about it.
Marcus Peters broke the mold a little bit there just because he was a first-round draft pick, but Chiefs didn't hesitate to part ways with him.
Yeah, you're right. Trent McDuffie, I will say, like, this conversation, I feel like you have to qualify it because he's a terrific player and just a great guy in the locker room. We're all around Trent McDuffie a lot. I mean, if he's not the best guy in that room to talk to, he's at least in the top 3 or 4. And, like, you don't just replace that easily. And I'm sure that's part of the Chiefs' calculus as well. Is yes, we developed this position easily. However, this would still be a pretty significant loss.
I think it's worth noting that we'll get media opportunities with Andy and Brett, and I think this will be one of the questions. And I think it's also a good reminder that we should take everything that's said at the Combine with a grain of salt. Like I remember being at Combines, for example, or Combine and hearing, of course we want to keep Tyrann Mathieu and we're going to work on that. And it didn't really necessarily play out that way behind the scenes. So they'll certainly be asked. I'm sure they'll compliment Trent and just say, we're communicating. But again, behind the scenes to what Sam's alluding to, you're talking to his representative, you're talking to other teams of what is the true interest level of this particular player.
You do. There is some reading between the lines over the years. And, last year, this is when we learned that Travis Kelce was coming back. The Chiefs were planning, like, their blueprint for 2025 included Travis Kelce, and they hadn't had any signs any other way.
Well, could this be the opportunity to learn about Travis Kelce's future? I think we've all changed our feeling about this based on little signs and social media posts and wherever the clues are. That I think at the end of the regular season, we were all feeling pretty convinced that Travis Kelce would not be back, and I'd have to say I'd lean more toward him coming back at this point.
This is the time where you need an answer from Travis Kelce, because the Combine is when you're mapping out your blueprint or really finalizing your blueprint for free agency, and the Chiefs need to know whether or not Travis Kelce's coming back. And I think he's the sort of guy that does not want to leave the Chiefs hanging. But what I wonder is, because of the way it unfolded last year, because that became the news of the Combine in Kansas City, was what Brett Veach had said that they were planning on having Travis Kelce back is, Travis Kelce probably knows that because he addressed it on his next podcast. Does he want to preempt what Brett Veach said was some sort of announcement one way or another definitively? Or does he want to tell the head coach and GM, hey, don't answer this question if you get asked. Say we're still working through it. I don't know that I anticipate it working out the same way, just because, he's making a lot of money on that podcast for a reason.
And I'm with you, Blair. I think toward the end of the season, we really didn't know. And if you watched Kelce in that final home game when he came out, I think it's legitimate. Maybe he wasn't 100% sure. So he was kind of doing it in a way where, just in case, saying one more goodbye to Arrowhead, one more run out of the tunnel.
I agree. He did not know.
But in the podcasts later, as you guys were alluding to, it seemed like he's leaning to have one more ride with Pat. I think it's very fascinating. And I wonder years from now if we find out, if we beat the Eagles, I might have been legitimately done. Or if Pat doesn't get injured, maybe I'm legitimately done. But it played out the way it played out. And now I do agree. I think he is leaning to come back. And we'll see if we get a confirmation at the Combine for a second year in a row.
That was always even the most important part of the conversation, was what was it like for him in the days and weeks after? And because I totally agree with Pete that I don't think Travis Kelce knew as the season wound down. I think he was preparing for it just in case it was his last season, but I just don't think he had definitively made a decision. And that is what he said, in his last game. We were in the locker room after the game in Vegas, and The difference was he said, hey, I know last year this was a conversation, but I decided a couple days after, like, I knew I was coming back. And he had said that this would require more time, but it does seem like his statements are hinting that he's at least strongly considering another year. And I think his reasoning would probably be he didn't want to go out 6-11 and not playing with Patrick Mahomes in his last 3 games.
There was a viral, believe, post of some sort, or social post or podcast with Kylie Kelsey, his sister-in-law married to Jason, and she kind of was hinting that maybe the family already knows that he's going to be on his way back. But there's a lot of mystery with him right now. Like, everyone off the field is focused on, when is this wedding happening? They're kind of keeping everything tight-lipped. But to me, it feels like the family as a whole obviously knows when the wedding is. And then I do think they realize that he's going to go and give it one more go. I do think this is finally the final decision. Like, I think it's one more year. I don't think he's going to do play after this, but I do feel like he's coming back.
Beat writer Pete Sweeney and Star columnist Sam McDowell are here. Okay, you're at the Combine, and so are hundreds of prospects. We really haven't talked much about the direction that we think the Chiefs will go, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to discuss it. But since we're talking Combine, players like Bain, right? Reuben Bain will be there, and Love, the running back from Notre Dame. Players that the Chiefs have been mocked to will all be there. Chiefs will be, have their stopwatches out and their clipboards and everything. But Pete, you had a story last week where you kind of lined up where number 9 overall picks who those players have been in the last few years. And I had not thought about it in that way, but that was a pretty impressive list of you can get a good player at 9.
Yeah, and every draft is going to be different. I tend to think as a whole this draft class is a little weaker than what will be next year. So you have to factor that in as well. But when you go back to the last 5 years and you just look at the names, the New Orleans Saints take Kelvin Banks Jr. That was a starter for them. He was a tackle. Chicago Bears take wide receiver Rome Odunze. The Eagles get Jalen Carter. Remember, he fell a little bit. The Seattle Seahawks get a tackle they ended up signing to a second contract in Charles Cross. The big one that should stand out to Chiefs fans is that's where the Broncos selected Patrick Surtain, who literally was drafted to counteract what the Chiefs were doing with Travis Kelce. Remember, this is 5 years ago now, Travis Kelce. And so, just when you look at that list of names, I think the thing that stands out that ties them all together is immediate full-time starter contributor. And that's a big difference than picking in the late 20s, sometimes 31, 32, where that isn't necessarily the case. Like, we ask Brett Veach every year, how many first-round grades do you have? It's never 32. It's usually within the range of 16, 17. Now you're picking number 9. So you should be able to lock in a first-round pick if you don't decide to trade back and maybe get more picks.
There are also more opportunities to trade back because these prospects are a different level than 30, 31, 32. I mean, the Jalen Carter pick was made after they traded up just one spot because there was fear that somebody else was going to trade with the Bears to get that pick, and that netted them a 4th-round pick in that draft. So I think there's going to be more opportunities for the Chiefs to be on the phone during this draft, incoming calls as opposed to outgoing.
You think it's more likely that happening because the Chiefs only have 6 draft picks right now?
Yeah, and I think a major part of that is just going to be what positions are available, not only who's available, but what positions. There's a lot of people that want Reuben Bain, David Bailey from Texas Tech. I think both those guys could be gone because there's not a lot of other great edge rushers in this draft, not a lot of great top-flight prospects at that position, in which case, I think that's by far the Chiefs' biggest need is to get more pressure on the quarterback some way, somehow. It's why the Seahawks won the Super Bowl this year. It's why a lot of teams have won the Super Bowl over the last 8 years. And to me, if you can't solve that position, I don't think a trade back would be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think when you watch the season as a whole, something that stood out was just the Chiefs' lack of ability to pressure the quarterback when they weren't blitzing. And that's why you saw them have to do that a lot, especially in big moments. And I think they need a winner along the defensive line. I would agree with Sam. I did an article for the Star weeks ago, and I just ranked the weakest positions. And for me, the weakest position is safety. But I kind of defined in the article when, you're losing Brian Cook, even though, in my opinion, again, their weakest position might be safety, you don't take one necessarily with the 9th pick, because the way that the draft works, that's where you need to get one of these pass rushers. And I completely agree. I think if there is one of these guys that Sam mentioned along the defensive line, you mentioned Bain and Bailey, maybe they pull the trigger. If they strike out and there aren't these impact defensive line players, maybe they finally do trade back later in the first round, and you could earn yourself 1 to 2 more picks. And I think they need more than 6 players this year, so that's going to require some type of trade.
That's one of the lessons of the last 2 Super Bowls, isn't it? The defensive line dominating the game.
All of them, the last 8. So like I was doing, I wrote on this, I guess it was the day after the Super Bowl last week, but in the last 8 years, the Super Bowl has either been won by a team that has pressured the quarterback at least on like a 38% pressure rate without blitz, on non-blitz plays, a 38% pressure rate on non-blitz plays, or it's been won by Patrick Mahomes. Those are the only 2 formulas that it's taken to win the Super Bowl. The Chiefs, literally are the only team that has a chance to do both, because no other team can employ Patrick Mahomes. They can at least attempt to do what the Seahawks did, what the Bucs did to them, what the Eagles did to them last year. It's the reason they've lost the Super. I mean, even the ones that they won, the 49ers have put pressure on them both games. Like, it's been tough for that reason. And so, to me, all their energy this offseason needs to be, how can you make the quarterback's life more difficult than what you made it this year?
And just as a quick sidebar to that, like you watched Josh Allen after they lost to the Broncos. That's why he was so crushed, because there was no Mahomes. And I think that's a big part of winning a championship. He's just one of one and wasn't there. And I think Josh Allen really realized, wow, we blew this opportunity.
Okay, you got some new coaches on the staff. We knew that Matt Nagy was going to do everything he could to move on, and he did. And he's now the offensive coordinator of the New York Giants, replaced by Eric Bieniemy. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But other staff members have filled in. DeMarco Murray, the running backs, is the new running backs coach. Chad O'Shea, the wide receivers coach. Interesting that the changes we've seen so far have been on the offensive side.
Yeah, and I think Eric Bieniemy comes in with that hard-nosed practice mentality, and I think it was going to be always, for me, very curious as to who they were going to bring in. They were connected to Dylan McCullough before they ended up going with DeMarco Murray, and then everything that you kind of get indicated as far as Murray's past is he's from the same type of hard-nosed coach. And so I think when you bring in Bieniemy and you bring in someone like him, and you have the ability this offseason to sort of pick your running backs, I think they're trying to really redesign what that room looks like. So, that to me is one of the points that stands out. And I'm interested in seeing maybe how it is a little bit different from an effort standpoint when we do get to St. Joseph.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to see much different from the offense, right? The coaching hires. I hope the wide receiver group is a little more disciplined than it was this past year. Maybe that's not the right word, but more productive anyway. And bringing in someone from the outside, I think, is a good thing in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, when you're winning at the level that the Chiefs had won the previous 7 years, really, but particularly the previous 5, I think you can start to believe that anything can work. And I think when you go 6-11, it needs to be a wake-up call for you to ask, why did this stuff work? Why did this stuff not work over the last year? I think part of that is that they have become predictable, which I actually don't blame them for in the way I've seen a lot of people blame them for. Like, when you stick with stuff that works, that's usually not a bad idea. But the rest of the league told them this year that they knew what was coming. Especially that Chargers game just really stands out, the way their safeties were playing downhill and it seemed to know the routes. And I think there's got to be some changes made there. I don't know if these coaches are the ones that are going to make the changes, but I do know that Eric Bieniemy, having an outside voice, look at and evaluate your offense, he's going to bring honesty to that conversation. Whether it hurts people's feelings or not, he's going to bring honesty to that conversation. I think there's going to be some value there.
Eric Bieniemy will make his presence known
anywhere, yeah.
Every practice. And certainly a training camp at St. Joe. Okay, great conversation with Chiefs beat writer Pete Sweeney and Star columnist Sam McDowell. We're still in something of an Olympic afterglow, aren't we? Especially with the riveting ice hockey finals with the USA women and men defeating Canada in overtime games. Thrilling stuff. Well, there's another international sporting event on the horizon. The World Baseball Classic begins next week. 20 national teams are involved, and many major league players will be participating, including 8 members of the Royals. Here's the rundown. Bobby Witt Jr. and Michael Wacha will play for Team USA. Salvador Perez and Michael Garcia will play for Venezuela. Seth Lugo will pitch for Puerto Rico. Vinny Pasquantino and Jack Caglione will play for Italy. Royals closer Carlos Estevez will pitch for the Dominican Republic, and many other Royals minor league players will suit up for national teams as well. The teams are separated into 4 5-team pools, and those games begin on March 5th. The championship game is March 17th, and all the games will be broadcast primarily on the Fox channels. This is the 6th World Baseball Classic, and the U.S. is looking for its 2nd trophy. Japan has won it 3 times, including the most recent tournament in 2023. This will be Salvador Perez's 4th time appearing in the World Baseball Classic. He was named captain of the Venezuelan team. A couple of weeks ago at the Royals rally, Salvi was asked what it means to play in this event for his home country.
Yeah, it's amazing. Play for Venezuela. I said something in Spanish. It's like play the Game 7 of the World Series every game in the WBC. Any team we face in WBC, you have to go hard. You never know what's going to happen, It's a short tournament. It's pretty short and intensity. So it's pretty good. Play the game in the WBC.
And finally, here's what's on my radar in Kansas City sports this week. Another facility is opened. The Kansas City Current held a ribbon-cutting ceremony today for Riverside Stadium and the Performance Center at the team's training facility. The stadium will seat 2,000 and be the primary home for the Current's 2nd team. The Performance Center will focus on player development. It's all part of investment in the Current's practice facility totaling $52 million. Also, Missouri has a big game tonight with Tennessee visiting Mizzou Arena, but when you're sitting where the Tigers are relative to NCAA tournament position, all games are big. The Tigers take an 18-9 record into the game. They're 8-6 in SEC play. I think if Mizzou finishes with a conference record above 500, they'll get an NCAA tournament bid. But if Mizzou finishes 9-9 or worse in league play, it might get a little dicey. Missouri didn't have great success in the non-conference portion of the schedule, but a strong finishing kick, starting with a victory tonight, should get the Tigers into March Madness. Well, that'll do it for this week. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC staff of Gabriella Lacey, Suzanne Hogan, Irvin Zhang, and Monty Davis, and to our editors Jeff Rosen and Scott Chasen. We'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City.